The first reading is from Isaiah chapter 7. Again, the Lord spoke to Ahaz. Ask a sign of the Lord your God. Let it be deep as Sheol or high as heaven. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, and I will not put the Lord to the test. And he said, Hear then, O house of David, is it too little for you to weary men, that you weary my God also? Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Immanuel. He shall eat curds and honey when he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the boy knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land whose two kings you dread will be deserted.
May be seated. We are coming to the conclusion of our time talking about the Old Testament, preaching from the Old Testament, the book of Isaiah. The thing that we need to bear in mind is we need to really dwell in the Old Testament during Advent. It is a season that can teach us a great many things. Most importantly, it can teach us how to wait patiently, which is not exactly something we do very well as human beings. You know, we often are pulled this way and that. We often fret and worry, believing that our day and age is the most frightening day and age that has ever appeared. We are fed a constant diet of fear, and we kind of like it. Even though the evidence to the contrary tells us that the world is getting better, we tell ourselves that we are at the end of all things. I need not tell you that this is far from the most terrifying time and place to be alive. I need not bring up the statistics about how people live longer, more children make it to their 5th birthday, and so on and so forth. But we all, from time to time, feel afraid of something. In retrospect, we are taken aback more by our reactions to our fears than the fears themselves, aren't we? What motivates our absurd and ridiculous behavior? Well, more often than not, it is a pride that we can manage just fine on our own, thank you very much. Our society is also adept to giving us fears as it is adept at feeding our pride. And feeding our pride when we are most vulnerable, caught in our very human emotion of trying to figure things out on our own. Indeed, movies or commercials or demagoguery remind us that when the chips are down, we must pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. That is the only way to be respected. And so, in our fear, we see the faint glimmer of our greatest hope, higher status, which will feed our pride and make us feel important. Perhaps this fearful time isn't so bad after all, we think. Now here we find the great lies like some many rivers of our society flowing towards one ultimate stream, that we're alone and that we have to make it on our own. Our pride is reinforced. Our fears are doubled down. And in the end of all things, when we look back, when the moment has passed, we find just how ridiculous we were to be afraid, how ridiculous we were to give in to our pride. Here in Isaiah, we find a king wrestling with the very things that many of us wrestle with. Attempting to shun fear, he turns to bravado. Isaiah's response, though, will not let him out of his ridiculous stance. Isaiah's response shows that our fearfulness only makes God's faithfulness more astounding. As we go and enter into the Old Testament, it's good for us to remember all the things that are happening so that we can see the promises that are being made. The first thing that we should note is the audacity of everything that is happening, the sheer quantity of changes going on in the world. If we were to look out at King Ahaz's world, we would see great empires rising. The Greek world is beginning to become the powerful and dominant cultural light in the ancient Mediterranean. And Rome has only just been founded just a few decades before. Mighty Assyria is ascended, while Egypt is entering into one of its recessions. There might have been a time for a small state like Israel to exist in the world, but that time has now passed. Great empires on the move. And what can a small state do in the face of such an onslaught? Into the court of the troubled king walks the prophet Isaiah, who makes the king an audacious offer to ask God to make any sign. And then he adds, Hamek Sha'ala O Hagba Lemala. That is, let it be as deep as Sheol or as high as the heavens. Now Sheol was the land of the dead, where people descended, and they descended to the lowest parts of the earth. While heaven was the place above the sky, the heavenly throne room where God dwelled. And of course, we think of the comparisons here. We think of the lowliest lows and the highest highs, but we must also bear in mind there's another aspect in this promise. We must also bear in mind that even the realms that represent death and being apart from God, or the throne room in which God dwells, in the presence of the author of life, nothing is out of bounds. Neither death nor life is too far from God making his promises known. What is striking is that the king does not take Isaiah up on this offer, for underneath all of it, underneath the forms and the presentations of the king, underneath all of these forms of devotion and piety is nothing more than pride, being goaded on by fear. Isaiah will have none of this. Isaiah speaks truth to this powerful king. Isaiah's response is an interesting rebuke that we would all be well to remember, not just kings and powerful, but even us who face small fears all the time. None of us are going to get out of the hole we are in by ourselves. And our pride and our self-reliance is not going to be able to come to our rescue like some cavalry marching down the hillside. The whole history of the Old Testament, which we should remember in Advent, is one long litany of utter failures attempting to justify themselves before creation and the author of creation. The kings and the patriarchs might have had a good run for a bit, but eventually they will run out of steam. They are bound to fail and are faced with revelation. This one revelation, that their sins are red as scarlet. But Advent is something different. Advent is that unexpected gift at an unexpected time. It is a promise God makes in spite of faithless kings, and indeed, in spite of our own faithlessness. The passage ends, interestingly, by saying the promised one, of whom there won't even be a hint of being able or tempted to choose evil, will come at a time even darker than this present time. Isaiah is telling him that if you think this time is the worst, you ain't seen nothing yet. But even at this worst time, when you fail as a king, God's faithfulness will succeed, even when it seems all hope is lost. In the annals of history, folks, we have never seen a hopelessness like this. And we have not seen a hopefulness like the Christ child being born. We have far too small an imagination. We think that God has come to make good people better. We think that if we just put in a little bit of our own share, God will top us off and take care of the rest. But notice this. Everything has failed. Everything has come apart. There is no nation. There is no one human going to come and save them. There is no mighty king with all the right answers and just the right ploys. Into that death, indeed the death of our own lives, enters the Creator, the author of life. This passage should be a terrifying one. A terrifying one for us because we are too often like that king. We are incapacitated by fear of the world, or we are terrified that our God, our illusion of God, our idol made in the image of our own selves, which we put in the place of God, has abandoned us. But we are reliant upon our pride. We fail to embrace God's mission of proclamation to the world. None of this is to say your problems will go away when you see the promises of God. Ahaz is told his kingdom will be undone. In other words, he's going to lose everything. Rather, what we see that when the world takes everything from us, God is promising us himself. As one great Christian said, he who has God and everything is no richer than he who has God and nothing. So instead of modeling Ahaz, or his contemporary emulators, of whom there are many this day and age, people who seek status or prosperity, let us instead model Isaiah and proclaim, behold, Immanuel, God is with us, and he shall be born of a virgin. Let us say to all the world, is anything too difficult for our God? Amen.